Bizarre.
I was 16 when I became a wife. There was little ceremony to it. The vows were spoken in a dimly lit room of an inn, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and unwashed travelers. The witnesses were reluctant, called upon to attend not out of affection but obligation. The priest muttered the Latin words with the weariness of a man too familiar with the affairs of others. My hands were cold, though whether from fear or the winter air I could not say. Alois held them firmly in his own, his grip not one of comfort but of possession. His fingers were calloused, thick and strong, a labourer's hands despite his station. He was a man accustomed to authority, a customs officer who had spent his years commanding lesser men. And now he commanded me. He was 50 years old. I was but a girl. I had known him all my life, not as a suitor, not even as a man, but as a looming presence, a distant cousin spoken of in my childhood as Uncle Alois. When he asked for my hand, I had no choice but to accept. An orphaned girl with no dowry does not dream of love, she dreams of survival, and so I did as I was told. The roads were thick with frost as we made our way to Braunau am Inn, the carriage wheels crunching over the frozen earth. Alois did not speak. He smoked his pipe and read the newspaper, the pages rustling in the dim light of the carriage lamp. I sat beside him in silence, my hands folded in my lap. I thought of my childhood home, of the mountains and fields that I would never again call my own. I thought of my mother, who had died before I was old enough to remember her face. I thought of my father, who had worked himself to death in service of men like Alois. And I thought of Anna. She had been his second wife, the one who came before me. The villagers had spoken of her in whispers. She had left him, they said, fled in the night like a thief. But no one knew where she had gone. I had asked Alois about her once before we were married.
Anna was foolish.
He had said simply, his voice devoid of emotion.
She did not understand the duties of a wife.
That was all, nothing more. The carriage jolted over a deep rut in the road, and I steadied myself, gripping the edge of the seat. Alois did not look up from his paper. It was the last time I thought of escape. Braunau was a quiet town, the kind that was neither prosperous nor poor, merely existing in the shadow of greater places. Alois' house stood on its outskirts, a two-story dwelling of dark wood and stone, taller than its neighbors, but unremarkable in design. As we approached, something in my stomach turned. There was nothing outwardly wrong with the house. Indeed, it was well kept, a respectable home for a man of Alois' position. But it filled me with an inexplicable dread. It felt too still, too knowing. Alois led me inside without ceremony. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of pipe smoke and something stale. Something that had settled into the bones of the house long before my arrival. The walls were lined with dark wooden beams, the furniture simple and practical. There were no frivolities, no ornaments of comfort, nothing to suggest warmth or joy. I swallowed my unease and followed Alois through the narrow halls as he showed me each room. His study, where I was not to disturb him. The parlor, where I was to receive guests, though he did not expect me to have any. The kitchen, where I was to prepare his meals, as there would be no servant for such things. And then the bedroom. The bed was large, its frame sturdy, its mattress firm. I stood at the threshold, my breath shallow. Alois placed a hand on my back, guiding me forward.
You will learn, Clara.
he murmured. And so I did. The house did not sleep. Alois, accustomed to early hours, would retire without hesitation, drifting into slumber as easily as a man untroubled by dreams. I envied him for it. I lay beside him, eyes fixed on the wooden beams above, listening to the sounds that did not belong. The creaking of the floorboards in the hallway, the slow, deliberate scrape of something against the walls, the faintest echo of breath, not Alois, not mine. I told myself it was the settling of the house, the wind against the windows, the fevered imaginings of a girl in an unfamiliar place. But then came the laughter. It was not loud, not the bright, joyful sound of mirth, but something else. A whispering chuckle, low and dry, curling through the darkness like smoke. I clutched the blanket to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. Alois stirred but did not wake. I turned my head slowly, straining to see through the dim candlelight. The room was empty, and yet I knew I was not alone. It came first as a shadow. A trick of the candlelight, I told myself, the shape of the wardrobe, distorted in the gloom, but it was not the wardrobe. It stood in the farthest corner, its form just beyond the reach of light, tall and thin, its edges shifting unfixed. I could not see its face, but I felt it watching. My breath caught in my throat, a strangled whimper escaping before I could stop it. My fingers dug into the mattress, desperate for something real, something solid. The shadow did not move, it did not blink, it only watched. I shut my eyes tight, whispering a prayer under my breath. The words felt weak, meaningless, dissolving in the air before they could reach God. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone. The house was silent once more. I did not sleep that night, nor the next. It was not long after our marriage that I was first with child. I was young, my body strong, and the midwife assured me that I would bear many more. Alois was pleased, though not openly affectionate. He was a man who valued legacy over sentiment. A son, he told me, would be the true mark of my worth. I carried the child through the summer, through the autumn, through the bitter months of winter. The pains came in the spring. I labored for hours in the dim candlelight, my cries swallowed by the walls of the house. The midwife worked in silence, her hands quick, her face unreadable. And then at last, the child came into the world, slick and red, squirming in the midwife's arms. Alois stepped forward, his presence looming at the edge of the bed.
"A boy,"
the midwife announced.
"He is strong."
We named him Gustav. For 2 years he lived. I let myself believe that the house had not taken him, that the sickness that came upon him was merely the cruelty of fate. The doctors could not save him. The fever burned through him in the bitter winter, his small body trembling as I pressed cool cloths to his skin. I did not sleep in those final days. I held him against me, rocking him through the long hours of the night, whispering prayers into his burning skin. Alois did not watch over him. He believed in the strength of men, even the smallest ones, and saw no purpose in grieving before death had arrived. He told me not to carry on so, that children died often, that another would come. I hated him for it. When Gustav's breathing slowed, when the final shudder left his small frame, the world tilted. I had done everything. I had begged, I had pleaded, and still he was taken from me. That night I did not sleep. I sat by the cradle, staring into the darkened corner of the room where the candlelight would not reach. It was there, watching. Had it been waiting for this? I closed my eyes and prayed, not to God, who had turned his face from me, but to the darkness itself. Another child followed as Alois had said it would. A girl this time, Ida, born in the autumn of 1886. She was quiet, her small hands curling around my fingers, her eyes wide and curious. I should have been afraid. I should have known that the house would not allow me to keep her. And yet for a time I let myself hope. But hope is a foolish thing. She fell ill a year after Gustav's passing. The same sickness, the same fever, the same slow wasting away of a child, too young to understand the cruelty of the world. I did not leave her side. I did not let the midwife take her from me. Not until her body had gone cold and there was nothing left to hold but an empty shell. Alois said nothing. He had learned long ago that his words meant nothing to me now. That night I dreamed of the house as it had been before, when I was a girl, when it had merely been an old place instead of something living, something waiting. And in that dream I saw them, Gustav and Ida, standing at the foot of my bed, their faces pale, their small hands reaching for me. I reached for them in turn, but then the darkness swallowed them whole. The third child did not even live long enough to be given a place in my memory. Otto was born in 1887 and taken from me the same year, barely breathing before he had gone still in my arms. I did not cry this time. I had no tears left to give. The priest came and performed the rites, and I stood by the grave as they placed him beneath the earth, beside Gustav, beside Ida. 3 small graves side by side, their stones unweathered by time. Alois did not stay long. He had business to attend to, reports to file, things of greater importance than the bones of dead children. I remained until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. And as I turned back toward the house, I felt it, the laughter, not spoken, not heard, but felt, like something curling through the marrow of my bones, something pressing against the back of my skull, something whispering without words. I had given it 3. Would it demand another? I did not pray for another child. 3 had been taken from me, their small bodies swallowed by the grave before they had even learned to walk. I had wept, I had pleaded, I had broken myself before the silent heavens, and still they had been taken. So when I felt the familiar sickness in the mornings, when I placed my hand upon my stomach and felt the first flutters of life within me, I did not rejoice. I was afraid. I told no one, not even Alois. He would know soon enough. The house knew before he did. The moment the child took root within me, the air inside the house grew heavier, thick with something unseen, something watching. The floors groaned beneath my steps, though no one walked them. The candle flames burned lower, struggling against a presence I could not name. The darkness in the corners deepened. It was waiting. The labor was long. The pains began in the dead of night, tearing through me like punishment. The midwife arrived at dawn, her face grim as she set to her work. Alois stood in the doorway, watching in silence, his arms crossed over his chest. He had seen it before. He had seen me suffer, seen the blood, seen the bodies carried away before they had drawn breath. He did not expect this child to live. I did not either. I screamed as the pain ripped me apart, as the room spun, as the voices of the living and the dead mingled in my ears. Shadows swam at the edges of my vision, shifting, twisting, whispering. It was here, the thing in the house. It had watched me, it had waited, and now it would claim this child as it had claimed the others. I fought, I pushed, I clawed my way through the agony, my nails digging into the sweat-soaked sheets, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room grew colder, the candlelight flickered, then dimmed, then died, and in the pitch darkness of the house I heard it. Not the laughter of the thing in the dark, not the rasping, hollow sound that had haunted me for years, but rather a child's cry. The midwife exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. Alois stepped forward, peering down at the squirming, wailing infant in the midwife's arms.
A boy.
she said, her voice uncertain, almost disbelieving.
A strong boy.
I reached for him, my fingers trembling, expecting him to turn cold in my arms, expecting the breath to leave him, expecting him to be taken as the others had been. But he did not die. He screamed, furious, insistent, demanding to be heard. Alois, for the first time in all the years of our marriage, smiled.
He will be a fighter.
He said. I looked down at the child in my arms, his tiny fists clenched, his face red with rage. And for the first time the house was silent. The shadow in the corner was gone. The thing that had taken Gustav and Ida and Otto no longer lingered. I should have felt relief. I should have rejoiced that I had finally been allowed to keep a child. But I felt no joy, only the weight of something I could not name, something curling within my son like a sleeping serpent waiting to stir. His face, though small and new, was already twisted in a scowl, his brow furrowed as though he resented being born into this world. His eyes, dark, stormy, held something beyond the innocence of infancy. I whispered his name, though the sound of it made my breath hitch in my throat. At that moment I knew that I had not defeated the demon. I had given birth to it. And someday the world would know the wrath of my dear Adolf.